All right, so we're
Stick with
officially
checking in.
beginning our program. I have started the recording, so we're off and running. I'm going to introduce first Wayne Pierce, do our layout tour. Minton, am I saying it right, Wayne? Minton Railroad and Lumber Company.
Minington.
Minnington, see, I said it wrong. Minneton, I knew that.
You were half right.
Yeah, that's better than
I'll
being
explain
all
that.
wrong.
I'll explain that when we get going here, why you're half right.
All right, wonderful. It's all yours.
I got to set this up. Okay, make sure this is working. Everybody see what we got there? We got two symbols on the screen.
Two symbols.
Okay. First off, I'm going to thank you all for showing up here. I was afraid that everybody was going to cancel because they heard it was me. So. I'm Wayne Pierce, the CEO and head guy in charge of the Minington Railroad and Lumber Company. Before I start into the presentation, I want to share a brief moment of my model railroad history. 1984, and the Railroad Model Craftsman magazine had a forced perspective photo contest. I was doing photography at the time, and I entered the contest, and this is what happened. I won third place and got a big buck award. I got a fine scale miniatures limited edition of Mackenzie a milling company, which I had no idea how to work with. It was a Craftsman model kit worth a couple $100. I used an HO roundhouse shay and scratch-built O-scale log car. The background is an 8x10 picture I took in the Sierra Nevada mountains years earlier. I used an old Brownie box camera with a pinhole lens and a 7-minute exposure, and using 250-watt light bulbs, that made the exposure. I was a photographer, so I was able to develop and print all the pictures myself. A town by any name is just a town, unless it's Mine Town. While painting a sign for my then HON3 layout, I misspelled entirely the name of the town, and it came out as Minington. I got this in the mail the other day. I finally got my railroad registered for with the NMRA, so I'm kind of happy about that. That means nobody else can use my MRL number. History of the MRL. This is my story, and I'm sticking to it. A good story goes with a layout. It adds a level of interest to the layout and may be needed to justify the artistic license used to portray events which may not be quite factual. The DNRGW ran on this line until 1951. It was nearly forgotten. The MR&L bought all the right-of-way, rolling stock buildings, towns, birds, and bees, and with a bit of capital from the stockholders, a refreshment campaign was launched. All the rolling stock was relettered with the Minington Railroad and Lumber Company name, and being a thrifty bunch of old guys, they painted over the DNRG logos and named it with a new MR&L road name. Much of the trackage was improved. In general, a much-needed facelift was given the line. The terms of the sale with the DNRGW was that all the rolling stock and the property on the line at the time of the signing of the contract would be included in the sale and become the property of the MR&L. Now, unbeknownst, is that a word? To the DNRGW, there were 4 engines and rolling stock which happened to be at the Juanita yard at the time of the sale. Engines were 497, 473, 476, and 477. These pieces of equipment were not known to be in the Minington area, but it seemed that a landslide blocked the trackage at the Elson Curve, and the equipment was delayed for 72 hours during the time of the contract signing. Contract was completed and legally binding, and the trapped equipment was now the property of the Minington Railroad and Lumber, a bonus for them and a loss for the DNRGW. Okay, a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's an English language adage, meaning that complex and sometimes multiple ideas can be conveyed by a still image, which conveys its meaning or essence more effectively than a mere verbal description. say that without messing it up. I have here in my photo album many pictures to share with you of my layout. Okay, this is the little house in which the layout lives. Some time ago, 1998 to 2009, I used to do wet plate photography. This was the building and a picture of me standing next to my equipment out in the backyard. It was used for my wet plate photography business. And this is what it looked like in color until the digital photographic process put me out of business totally. Many people have posed in front of my cameras. These are the types of pictures I used to take pictures of. The interior of the studio then became a model railroad layout. This is the little house in which the layout lives today. You can see that I've added on quite a bit here. This was the original photographic layout studio here. I then went into a building in the back here, 10 by 20 shed. And this is a recent addition of a 12 by 12 that I have put on just this last year. Over the years, I've amassed a lot of relics from railroads and logging camps, all this rusted equipment here. I picked up out on the ground somewhere in the desert or in the mountains. What did I want to do with a model railroad? Many in the hobby think that ON30 is all about the rolling stock being as short in length as they can get, curves as tight as one can get, and the layouts as whimsical as one can get, like a cartoon. I saw a lot of those types of layouts as modules they had at train shows. They were crowd pleasers. I myself operated layouts at shows and shopping centers for years myself with Lionel gauge, and we did just that. Simple reasons I chose this gauge. I enjoyed the mystique of the mountain narrow gauge. To model the large sprawling railroads, roaring through middle America was easy. But modeling the intricate and mystifying narrow gauge railroads would be quite a challenge. Plus, this is a big one. I can see it, and sometimes without my glasses off. There are rivet counters who scorn the whole idea of ON30 train sets. To them, it's not a real model railroad. I say to each his own, and it's my layout and my rules. My layout track is gauge is ON30. In my world, that is the narrow gauge I was looking for. I use the main layout as the standard gauge railroad and the logging layout as the narrow gauge. There are lots of pros and cons about the ON30 gauge. To many, the choice of equipment are not available or are limited. I found that to be true at first. Then I opened up a whole new world of the internet, opened my eyes up. These are some of the vendors that whom I deal with or have. You'll notice that there's quite a few of them on here. Most of these deal with O gauge products or HO. But the ones in red highlighted are the ones that deal with ON30 specifically. So these are the ones I've stuck with. The railroad was originally designed for modeling with a runaround of the layout. But then by being talked to by friends, I then began changing the layout to be used for minor operations. Layout designs, I had no set design in mind. I laid out a basic track plan on the floor. And when it seemed okay, I started building the framework. As each new add-on came about, it was not planned. It just followed the lay of the building that had already laid track in. I tried to make use of the available space as much as I could. I had one layout. I made two railroads. I have here a cheap, really poorly made sketch pad that I used on the computer to show what the progressive of my layout. This is the very first original track plan before any additions. Very simple dog bone, point to point, a very crude design. This is the main line after the second add-on into the Kelsey Valley. You can compare the size of the original layout with the next two add-ons. This is the second part here, that other building that I went into that I showed you on the slide back there, the 10 by 20 shed. This is the main line today after all the add-ons. I have the 12 by 12 shed off to the left, the main line, and then the other one. Now, I decided I had a lot of extra room inside the layout. started to grow like the main line did. I started to call one layout the Minnington Railroad and the second the Minnington Logging Railroad. There's a lower, and this is the upper level. A fairly steep climb on the north end of the main line gets one up to the level of the logging layout. You'll see this in the pictures when we get there. The routing the entire logging layout, it starts at 2 points. Here at the terminus, and this is a crossover to the main line. This is the logging area. The sawmill is going to here. It starts here and here, goes down around under the tunnels through the high desert, starts climbing, then up to the upper level to the mountains to where the logs are loaded onto the track, the cars. This is the routing of the entire logging layout. If you see it from above, it looks like a big pile of spaghetti, but actually there is some method to this madness. Layout design. How did I want to build this? I started using the open frame construction. The layout when first started in 2009 and 2010 in a room in the house. It soon became apparent that the layout was going to be too big or the room was going to be too small. Either way, I moved it, and what a better place than my now defunct photo studio. I decided to hand lay the track using 2 spikes each tie, alternating inside and then outside. The main line uses code 100 rail. The logging line uses code 83. My larger engines cannot go on the logging layout, so now I have 2 layouts. This is the first picture of the first layout that I did. This is with first expansion. It doubled the size of the layout into the other room that I made. Now I'm at the junction of the second add-on where the logging layout. And to the right of this picture is the Quincy Valley and Depot. Up here is the upper level of the logging layout that I made. This is the main line that goes around this way. Over here is the logging layout, and this is where the sawmill is going to be, right in here. The Quincy Station is there. It's a model of the Ophir Station in Colorado. Quincy is Darius Quincy. He was a railroad photographer between 1869 and 1945. The upper logging layout has ground cover on it right now. The bottom part just partially. I use real dirt from my yard. The gophers dig it out all over the yard, and I scoop it up and strain it and then bake it in the oven for some time to kill any bad bugs and other stuff. This is the newest layout, the third add-on section. Now my railroad friends talked me into building a new addition to the layout. Of course, it was at my expense, and this is what ensued. A 12 by 12 addition for a staging yard and a Y, plus new sidings for the long-awaited and much-needed quarry for coal and gravel. See the new staging yards over here, got 3 main lines and 2 freight lines, and 1 bypass line goes to the Y. This is going to be a cattle pen here, and it comes back around over to where the coal area is going to be over this way. I just installed these photographic murals. I like clouds and stuff, so this all the way around, there's going to be scenery that is going to cover up most of the bottom, so you won't be able to see that. It'll be a transition. How to control and operate my layout. I started out with a Bachmann DCC controller in the house, but after the move, I added a 10-amp NCE DCC system. I have 6 cab controllers on my layout. NCE allows one to transfer control of a moving train to another cab without having to unplug the controller. I found a whole new way to control the layout. I use a local router to connect the phones with a JMRI interface as throttles. I don't have internet in my railroad room yet. I bought a really long Cat5 cable, but have yet to run it out there. I use a JMRI for the programming of all my engines. I have 1 track designated as a programming track, and in the house, in my hobby room, I have another system set up with the rollers that you set the steam engines on or any engine and just let it chug away there while you program it. All of my locomotives had the Tsunami 2200. I have one Economy in the yard switch engine. I am keen on making the scenery as realistic as I can. I use real dirt and earth products, which is rocks and gravel when I can. I collect rocks and soil, gravel when I make trips to other places. For the newest additions of the logging area, the soil and ballast came from the areas around Durango, Colorado, and Chama, New Mexico. My method of layout construction uses styrofoam. I laughed at this idea at first. Then it became the only way to fly. I don't know of anybody else that uses styrofoam. I'd sure like to know. Except for the wood framing on my layout, all the scenery is built on a base of styrofoam. Styrofoam cuts easy, is light, gluable, rip-upable, and cheaper than plywood, and hardly any of it goes to waste. I cut it with an electric knife in the layout room, or if I have to cut a whole sheet, then the table saw comes in handy. But it sure does make the Hollywood snow scene on the driveway. You can see the extra styrofoam that I have, I just keep cutting it, piling it, cutting it, piling it, and shaping it the way I want it to be eventually. From the styrofoam to plaster. I use plaster of Paris and not hydrocal as it sets too fast and dries rock hard. I cannot carve hydrocal like I do with a plaster. These rocks over here, the striated ones, are made out of one mold. After a while, you figure out how to make the molding work so it looks different. On this side is made out of just using two rock molds. This is what it looks like when I'm done with it. The rocks have an acrylic print wash on it. And here you can see a division line between the ecosystems. Right here, I decided how to get from the desert to the mountains. And I figured a stream and bridge area would be just perfect. This is a high desert, and then it gets into the mountains over this side with pine trees. I've always wanted water, rivers, streams, and waterfalls modeled on the layout. Woodland Scenics liquid water used here. Applied to glass, flat and shaped into the look I want. And after it dries, it peels off, and I again use the liquid water to glue it in place and keep adding to it and let it flow down. Dry brush on some white paint along with some cotton, and you have rushing water and foam. These streams are the Woodland Scenics amber water beads. One has to melt them to use the product. I thought they were discontinued, but I think they still sell them. But they have a problem with cracking over a while. While this is setting up, I use a heat gun to melt the surface, and it can be stippled using a wood coffee stirring stick to make ripples and waves. This is a small video of the chasm that I built. All the bridges and stuff, they're removable. The top layer comes off, the whole bridge in the rear comes off. This whole section will slide out because once in a while I have to get to the back of the layout. And the back tunnels can come off too, because things do happen to railroads, the little train engines on the tracks. That's not me fishing. I don't fish. If anybody gets airsick, now's not the time. I was introduced to ON30 model railroad by my friend in New Zealand, so I started that direction. Bachmann had made some interesting operating trains for a new scale that was coming out. So I bought a few engines and some rolling stock, and away I went. After a very short while, all the Bachmann engines broke down. Well, so much for that venue. It soon became apparent to me that it just wasn't enough. After much, and I mean a lot of searching on the internet for something else, I discovered that there was more to the ON30 model railroad than what was in the local hobby store. I could not find at first places on the internet which had engines and rolling stock that I wanted. Where would I get them? After more searching, I found Mountain Model Imports, a division of Precision Scale sold to this company, Southwest Narrow Gauge. The owner of this business is not very friendly and charges for some items up to 50% more than the market value, so I don't buy from him anymore. Okay, I found the engines. What about the rolling stock? The San Juan Car Company, at the time owned by the previous owner of Reed's Hobby Shop in La Mesa, jumped out at me. I bought their kits and some ready-to-run items. I have adopted the Bachmann rolling stock to use as track cleaning cars, and I gave away all but one of their engines. I use the ON3 style couplers on all my rolling stock and engines. This is not the same height as the standard ON30 HO height. I use the San Juan Company Evolution couplers, which look like prototype coupler. When I first started model railroading, I wanted the smoke and fire breathing heavy steam engines, a holdover ideal from when I first had my Lionel train set. These are my largest engines that I have, the K37 and the K36. All my steam engines are modeled from the narrow gauge railroads. If some of you don't know what a K36 or a 37 or a C19 or a K2720, that's all right. I don't know what a GMD, a BBC, and the other diesel engines is either. So you can tell me that and I'd believe you. These three engines here operate on my layout with a fourth number 477, which is on permanent display and non-operational in the 4-stall engine house. I've used it for parts already. Two of three K27s that I have. One is still new in the box. The model of the 473, or 463, excuse me, down here, was offered for sale to the Friends of the Cumbres and Toltec. Eventually, it went on sale to the public. Now, this is a picture of the original 473, the prototype, 463. Or is this one? I can't tell. Little joke, sorry. Okay, C19s and one diesel engine. The 340 and 344 are two versions of a C19 with fluted domes and a 344 round for the 340. The 47 is American Model Supply brass engine, which is my only diesel operating on the layout, and I've used it as a yard switcher. It is a dead rail engine, towing electronics and battery in a converted tender. It is equipped with the economy decoder from Soundtrax, and it can pull quite a bit of weight for its size. I'm not going to show you all my rolling stock. I just have a few things, but I don't have a lot. Almost each one has been individually modified, scratch built, or kit bashed in some way. I made these when I was going to use my layout for modeling and not operation, and a lot of work went into the construction of them. A large majority of my rolling stock are San Juan car kits, which are plastic. I have several other vendors' kits, which are wood craftsman type. I like a moderate amount of weathering on my rolling stock models and engines. These are 4 San Juan boxcars. The heavy weathering on the one on the upper left is where I keep it, usually up in the high desert. The one on the bottom left, the gray one's going in my maintenance away train. And the other two are fairly newer cars with light weathering on them. These are Mountain Blue model companies. These are all wood craftsman car kits. They're all detailed inside and out. I had to add my own couplers and own trucks to them. Two Mountain Blue model companies on the rail cabooses on the left-hand side. The upper right, the Minnington Railroading Company, is a San Juan car company. And the Bachmann caboose on the lower left, or lower right, excuse me. I'm getting tongue-tied. Here are San Juan model car company kits. Except for the number 692, that's this one down here. All the rest of my flat cars have replaced with real wood decks. I'm gonna blow this one up. You see, I've replaced all the wood decks, the plastic deck, but wood kits in it here. And I found some stirring sticks that have these tapered inside it, so they look like the wood has been split and shrunk down. I almost have a dozen flat cars on the layout, and most are idler flats modeled after prototypes that were made for the DNRGW from the frames of old stock cars. These are Mountain Blue model wood craftsman kits. All the wood kits were designed for the ON30 coupler height. Since I use the ON3 height, all the modifications had to be done by me. All my cars have ON3 coupler heights on them. Now these are interesting. These are almost all totally scratch built. I made 9 of them all total. The kits that were originally are from the San Juan Car Company. The long plastic bodies were 11.5 inches long, way too long for what I wanted, and they were so light that many were warped, and I changed them all. I made new wood bodies from the strip wood glued so that they would not warp by gluing the grain in different directions. I routed out a pocket for the couplers and ground out the wheel rounds. I added a sheet of lead to the tops and bottoms of all the cars to make them have some weight. I used the rest of the parts and pieces from the kits to finish them off. See, up on the top here is a sheet of lead, and right down here on the bottom is a sheet of lead. And I had to route out a hole on the end of it here to put these couplers in, and then carve out each individual wheel wells. The OB pile driver is a San Juan kit. The spreader kit is from Wiesman Local Painter Company. It was almost all resin. I believe it sat on hot shelves so long that all the pieces were warped and brittle. I used a San Juan flat car kit to replace the one that I had. I had to extend it by 1.5 inches to fit. I put on a wood deck as all the flat cars have. I had to scratch build a new pilot house. I made new spreader wings from sheet styrene. They actually do spread out, but this is not able to go around my layout as it hangs down too far on the supports, spreaders on the bottom of the wings. It hits rocks and things I have around my layout. The only parts usable from the whole kit were the parts that were white metal, and I had to adopt my own trucks as the one that were supposed to be with the kit were just not. This is a backwoods model crane kit from England. They are no longer in business. It is a stamped brass kit. I've never built one before. This was designed to go on a Bachmann HO diesel switch engine motor assembly. I mounted it on a flat car, made a depressed center to lower the center of gravity for the crane. I primed it, painted it yellow, then put paint remover to take off some of the yellow, then put a metal blacking solution on it. I have my own method for applying rust and grime, and like some companies, it's a proprietary secret. But ask me, I'll tell you. Okay, again, San Juan Car Company kits with almost all the plastic replaced with wood on the wheel cars, and they're also the rail and tie car. The flanger is a very delicate kit. It is at the Midtown facility car barn being repaired. It cannot go around the layout as the wings are way too wide. Okay, these are just ready to run cars. I repainted them for my layout. Drop bottom gondolas, 4-sided gondolas. These are Bachmann passenger cars I renumbered. You probably noticed by now that almost all of my rolling stock has my road name and logo on it. They are a combination of decals and rub-ons. You can't have a good railroad without one's own name on it. All right, now down to the layout itself. Towns and places and other things. A model railroad needs some place to live and other places to go. I use real place names or make them up. The first one is Juanita. It is a real town in Colorado at the turn of the century and up into the 1950s. This is it right here. This is the town of Juanita. The DNRGW ran along this roadbed. It's not there anymore. You can see one bridge right in here, and there's another bridge over here. It's located just north of the New Mexico border, about the middle of the state. This is the oil pipeline at Chama. Oil was gravity fed to this facility from a couple miles away. This was the railroad loading facility for the Gramps Oil Company for a while. I made this facility using brass pipe and solid brass rod. It is modeled after the prototype in Chama at the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad Yard. There's a picture of it at night. This is the Juanita Yard at night. I use a combination of grain and wheat bulbs and LED lights. This is one of my very first building kits on the layout. These aren't kits. A scratch-built coal tower and a scratch-built water tank. They were the first structures on the layout. I did not know what a coal tower really looked like when I built this one. The coal storage bin is the same kind as I built for the Elson mine ore loading bin. I had made a jig for that one, so I used it again. This would have been an enclosed elevator system for the cold weather. And also, I did not know what the lifting mechanisms looked like at the time. These are one of two water tanks I scratch built. The water spouts, pulleys, rigging are all handmade out of brass. I guessed at the size of this tank by putting an engine on some track and drew lines on a piece of paper to a height which seemed correct to use. Individual wood slats tapered at the tank slats, inward at the type as the top slides inward slightly. You can see individual little thin slits here about every fifth layout, and they taper inward. The pump engine is from a 1/35th scale Tamiya World War II Jeep model. I've also a soundtrack player attached, which plays the pump starting. This right here, somebody shot a hole in the water tank, so it's leaking. This is the Elson Mine. This is another big layout I have. So named for a fellow photographer who paid me once with a gift certificate to Reed's Hobby Shop. So I bought a bunch of track, hence his name, Elson and Elson Curve. The mine shaft is from Anvil Mountain Products. They're out of business now. It is a copy of the Yankee Girl mine of Colorado as seen in the original photos down below. That down here is when it was covered up. Close-ups of the Elson mine. The bin, conveyor, or scratch built for the ore chute footing. I used poured and placed real concrete cement. I used it all for the footings, for pillars, slabs, and whatever on the layout. The motto of this mine is whatever you need, we don't mind getting it. Elson mine lit up at night. The Elson mine had an original shaft, pit number 1. You can see what is left of the machinery used to operate it. They used ore carts and tracks to bring the ore over to some wagons for transport. It had to be closed as the rail line was put in too close to it and started causing cave-ins. Trestles at the Elson mine. I used the Black Bear construction bridges and trestle jigs, but you got to build them. And like someone said, you got to read the manual. And when you're done, you read the manual again on how to do it. This company is no longer a business. He passed away and his wife sold the business. These are some more of the Black Bear construction trestles. As I said before, this whole scene is removable from the layout, which allows me access to the removable hills in the back. The deck on the front bridge is removable. This whole front deck here comes off. This whole bridge back here will come off, back to here. I have rail joiners which connect electrically. Then the whole thing will slide out onto a table. Close-up details. Example of the poured concrete in place I use on my layout. Build a form and pour the concrete in. As it starts to dry, you start chipping it and scoring it and everything else. Little details of the trestle with NBWs, plates, girders. Now, this is the little area that's on my layout I put back on place. My company was the company photographer when I started my photo business. The model I have here of a photo wagon is by Berkshire. I hand built all the rest of this stuff. This is a dark box, which a photo of my setup really down here was right here. The camera is over here on the left-hand side. The table down here on the right-hand side, I've reproduced here with actual miniature photographs and slides with trays and bottles and carts and everything. My company photographer business is still in business up on my layout in the town. We'll get to that in a minute. This is the new engine facility, a real forced dollar. This was built on the ground in which the lumber mill was going to be built. The better land here, land use here. This is the biggest building on my layout. With the exception of the small building in the center of the picture and the boxcar, all the buildings and structures are scratch built by me. No kits at all. I have no plans. I just built it as it showed. Details are mixed of bought from several vendors. These are eye candy items. The foundation of an old building remains. Parts and pieces are thrown out but saved. The forklift unloading area. The forklift was a Caterpillar model with a cab on it and the scoop shovel. I took off the scoop bucket and put on forks because I needed something to unload the cargo with. The crow's eye view. The turntable is also my own build. The water tower here is built using coffee stirring sticks. And I'm going to claim that as me sleeping on the dock. The forklift is a metal cat scoop tractor I made out of a forklift front. This is what it was when I started building the thing. The floors are from poured concrete. The block walls are also concrete poured onto latex molds I made and then glued back to make a two-sided block wall for interior and exterior viewing. The west wall is brick from New England Brownstone Company, also glued together back to back. The machine shop has wood walls with real glass in the windows and skylights. All the roofs are removable. The interior machinery is from Sierra West Company, but no longer available. I designed the rafter framework to hold the pulley belt system which the machinery uses. A complete machine shop and even a blacksmithy are located herein. A steam-powered engine to drive the pulley system. I also have a sound system here. You push the button and you can hear the shop sounds. This model was a lot of work and it's the biggest that I have done. The engine repair facility inside has 3 stalls for everyday repair and 1 with a pit for undercarriage service. I now have a gantry pit over it now. The paper plans rolled on a counter are miniature copies of locomotive technical plans available from the internet, and the various parts from the sellers make up the details. Payne Junction, one of my biggest towns. Payne is so named for a good friend and master model railroader, Brett Payne from the lands down under. It is also a meeting point for the 5 railroad tracks. It was a pain to figure out how the layout through here. Here's the gas station and the garage. I move items around at times to vary the scenes. Notice the car and the truck have changed, but the attendant has been checking the oil for some time now in job security. The logging truck is under repair. It is a kit bash model. It is a Revell Honest John missile hauler. A Weissman Company adaptation kit for the logging truck is put on. I have 3 of these on the layout, or will have. The building, this is the garage out in the back. The building was a Sierra West kit for the boiler house to be used on the sawmill. I used it here for the garage. There are now several of the blue porta potties around the layout too. The garage with an old truck under repair. One good thing about this is O scale stuff, not HO. So a friend of mine said, you really put a lot of detail in this, because I said the O scale has got to be so you can see it because it's big enough. If you don't put it in there, it doesn't look right. This is the Payne Junction store. It's a really nice laser cut kit. This is where the company photographer has a place again in the railroad layout room. It also serves as the post office and the Greyhound bus depot. Various views of the store. The signage is from ads taken off the internet, scratch-built boxes and stands. The fruit is made from putty, painted with junk boxes also. This is the mid-yard facility. This is the paint shed at mid-yard. It's modeled after one of the Chama, New Mexico Cumries and Toltec. This is the original down here, the prototype, and you can see what I've done here with it. Except for the tools and the gas can, I made everything else. One good thing about O-scale is you can see it. This is the mid-yard car barn. The walls are from the brick New England brownstone. The entire brick structure is removable, as is the roof, and then the engine repair building itself. This is no longer used for engine repair of the logging engines. That has been moved up the hill to the logging repair house there now. It is now a car barn. This is the second biggest item on my layout. As I could not find a decent or any production kits on the market for the Chama coal tower, I made one from the outline drawings from the internet, what you see on the screen there. I put the lift house on the back as the existing trackage required it. And it is 16 inches tall. Other pictures of it. My guess as to what being the top of the tower of the hoist. Grant and I made a kit for the Chalma coal tower, which included the buckets and some minor items. The pulley wheels and pillow frames are from leftover from the machine shop in the roundhouse. The chute and coal dump were made from sheet brass, flat brass, and sheet styrene. Picture of it at night using LEDs. Second water tower of my make. This one has more water storage capacity than the one in Juanita, this is 1 inch taller, but it's built using the same pattern as the water tower. Up on the upper logging facility, the engine repair facility on the hill for the logging engines. It needs a new roof, which they have started work on, using the Artista O-scale workers for this. There's a turntable and pit and a storage shed. These are all scratch-built items. Details of the storage shed. I make the barrels and paint cans from sheet brass, rolled and soldered. Scratch built the scoop bucket from brass sheet. This is another scratch-built turntable. Steel rod and metal strap are what makes up the brass for the turntable, set in bronze bearings. It is a manually operated turntable. I poured and placed concrete for the ring walls. I use a brass rod and tube alignment system for each stop of the track alignment. See over here on the left-hand side is the little lever. This pulls up and slides back and forth. Turn it, and there's another adjoining tube and hole slot over on this side, so it locks it in place. This scene is a very prominent one on the layout, so I think warrants a closer view. It's a new drain pipe for the mid-yard. The ditch digger's at work and the shovel driver heading for the can. The porta potty is a balsa wood block with a photo of a porta potty glued on the outside, which I downloaded off the internet. The skip loader is the same model as the one in the engine repair facility, but this one has the bucket and the cab still attached. I have several station depots around the layout. 3 of the station stops are depot buildings. The trotter station is just a half a kit to fit against the wall because I'm cramped for space. This is the Kinsey station here, which has a coffee shop on the top with Starbucks coffee. In Timberview, with another handmade water tower and a loading platform. The big one down here, Payne Junction Depot, is a model of the Cumbries Depot, which burned down many years ago. Also a visit here by Doctor Who's TARDIS, if anybody knows who that is. It's a platform view and a side alley view. This is the back side of the station, a view rarely seen by visitors. The logging train hauling a load of cut timber goes by. Now, what everybody's been waiting for is a virtual tour of the layout. 3 minutes long. 476 leaving the yard. That is the soundtrack's Tsunami 2200 into it that you're hearing. I warned the photographer as we were coming up on this train here that he's a little bit too close. Of course, he laughed at me until the engine got here. So I asked him politely to move aside.
Wayne, I am sorry to interrupt. We're not
Sure.
getting any sound, so we can continue silent, or if you want to share again with the checkbox.
Not getting sound off the video or from me?
Off the video.
Oh,
You probably need to check those boxes in the share, but we can continue silently, or if you want to start it again, that was what you need to do. So, but you're narrating it nicely.
is that it? Well, I didn't want to start over again.
You'd have to, I'm sorry, you'd have to start over if you want to, you would have to start your share over if you wanted to do that. Oh, what if you did work? Never mind.
Well, I went to text those boxes and it started the whole slide over again.
Gotcha. Anyways.
Anyway, is it working? I hope.
Yes.
Well, anyway, I told the guy to get away from the engine here. So, like I said, the Tsunami's 2200 sounds are really good out of the steam sounds. I found that these were taken with my iPad. I found that I can get a trackside view if I turn the whole iPad upside down and put the lens on the track. It automatically adjusts the picture correctly to be right side up. See the sand pit down there in front where the guy is supposed to be watering it down? In the ash pit in the sand house. This is the only spot you can see the train coming through from the back layout. There's a really long tunnel that's almost 25 foot long. It's the only way to get the train around the outside. This is one of my favorite views here is the Elson Curve. When I first bought these engines, I put them on the track. This track was made for Bachmann engines. It wouldn't go around any of my trackage because all the rocks were in the way. So I had to cut and dig and scrape all the rocks away from the roadbed to make it wider. That's the upper bridge up there is the logging bridge. This lower one is the main line. It takes about 12 minutes for this train at this speed to run around the whole entire layout if I just let it go without stopping. With the two railroads here, the logging layout and then the main Minington Railroad. You see the Elson mine up on the upper left of the screen there. Water stopped up there. Almost done. Almost. Okay, that was it.
Thank you, Wayne. Does anybody have any comments or questions before we move on?
Oh,
That was
Wayne,
awesome.
Wayne, your modeling is truly exceptional. Some of the best scenery I've ever seen. And from a scenery guy like myself, it's very inspiring. I do have one question. When you say you poured the concrete, like for the pit,
Yes.
did you really use concrete did you use plaster?
I used anchor cement, which is real concrete. I had a little 1 or 2 minute display about that we were going to put on here. I don't know if we're still not about concrete pouring, but I formed the molds with plastic around it, and I actually mixed up the anchor cement, which is concrete, and you pour it in there and let it set up. And before it sets up all the way, you scrub your lines into it, your holes, your cracks, and whatever. Same thing with the floor of the engine house. That was all poured in place.
Really cool. Thank you for sharing your video and your layout.
We've got a couple questions from the chat. Let's see. Did you have to add weights? And if so, where on your flat cars?
Yeah, I put in steel weights. They're in the slots where the bottom of the the framework goes, and glued to the bottom of the bed of the flat car itself. So I had to cut them down so they'll fit in the slots in there. So you can't see them from the outside. If you turn the car over, then you'll be able to see where the weights are at. I had to put them on there, otherwise they're really light.
There was also a question about if you did use lead, somebody was concerned about the health and safety considerations, and if there's something else to use.
No, there's no health consideration. You're not eating it. You're not ingesting it. You put it on there, you glue it, you paint it. That's
Some
it.
people commented that they use pennies. So
Pennies are zinc and copper. You have to put a lot of pennies on there to make up for the lead weight.
They are only a cent.
there are quite a few comments about just how beautiful the layout is and the water effects and the detailing. It's a lot of kudos in the chats for this layout.
I appreciate it. I've been working on this layout for almost probably almost 11, 12 years now to get where it's at. So I can't get anybody to come over and look at it. Everybody say they're going to come over and nobody shows up.
Now, where do you live?
Southern California.
Oh, well,
Wayne, are you in El Cajon?
Yes, I am.
oh, home.
One of my favorite acoustic guitar companies is there.
Taylor?
It is.
Taylor, I
That's the one.
toured that factory about 10 years ago.
Did you really? I tell you what, I was on the fire department forever, and we used to go to Taylor Guitars all the time for tours.
Here's mine.
Yeah, there we go.
There it is.
Play something.
All right, let's move to show and tell.
Wait,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I had a question for Wayne. I was wondering, he said that his larger locos don't run on these logging lines. I was wondering if that was because of the grade or the radius or both.
All the above and more. It's code 83 track. It's very small compared to what the edge are in on code 100. They just do not fit on any of the road bed around it because I have the rocks and plants and everything else in the way. Just physically won't do it.
Okay, and one other question on your foam. It looks like your foam is basic white styrofoam. Is that correct?
Yeah, I buy it in a 4x8 sheet. It's the insulation foam. I get it from one of the Home Depot places.
What do you recommend bonding it with?
You have to use the water, the new green can health eco-friendly glue.
Got it. Thank you.
Wayne, so that's the insulation styrofoam, not packing styrofoam?
Right. It's the sheet fire styrofoam. It's 1.5 inch thick.
Right.
It comes with 2 plastic Mylar coverings on it, which you have to pull off. And the best way I found to take that off is take a heat gun and heat it as you pull it. Otherwise it falls apart.
So is it the blue or pink, or is it
It's white.
white?
Just like it shows. It's what they put on the walls now for insulation. Instead of using the rolled insulation, they put the styrofoam on. Use it.
Wayne, I have a question for you about your. Wayne, I have a question for you about your telephone over your right shoulder.
Yes, Gene. I know you. How are you?
Good, thank you. You?
I've seen you for a while. You turned.
True.
You got your.
What? Oh yeah, you like that?
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sorry, folks.
I got my haircut.
Gene and I have known each other for a while now. The telephone, that's a phone from the 1950s that I picked up. It still works, but the ringer doesn't work because it uses the wrong voltage for the telephone lines nowadays.
Okay. Yeah, my wife used to work for Ma Bell, and
Yeah, that has the old original phone number paper dial on it
oh sure,
with a
okay.
phone number on it.
Another
Wayne,
question. Another question. At the end of the video, it showed your website. I reached for a pencil to write it down and it disappeared. Can you repeat the website? I'd like to see more.
MinningtonRailroad.org.
Railroad all spelled out.
Yes. All one word, MinningtonRailroad.org.
Thank you. I'll be looking you up.
Yeah, it's a big website. It's very large.
If you go back to the announcement for this meeting, the name of his railroad is linked to that as well. Just click on it. Yes.
I'm sorry if I took too long for this video, the presentation. but
I think everybody enjoyed it, Wayne.
Yes, it was well worth it.
Very much so.
I got a lot of cotton in
Time
my
well
mouth
spent.
right now.
Yeah.
It was
Drink some
amazing.
water. I'm going to ask you in a minute if you want
Yeah.
to do your show and tell. But
I got those. Yeah, one of them is the concrete.
Okay.
They're not very long, very short.
So I'm going to take the floor for a minute, and I'm going to do my show and tell. It's not really mine, and then I'll go back to Wayne after he's recovered from his presentation. All right. So Steve Bradley, you might remember Steve Bradley did a layout tour for us a couple months ago. I forget exactly which month it was, and he sent me some pictures. He was sorry he couldn't be here today, but he sent some pictures to me and said, if you'd like to share them, feel free. So I'm going to, oh, I didn't realize I was already sharing my screen. I am going to go ahead and show his pictures for you. All right, so it's a transfer train. And I'll apologize ahead of time, so I'm just going to read what it says on the slide, since they're his words and not mine. So, okay, got back to the club running trains after almost a year, and he had worked on number 9, the rail number 9. I think that's the one on the flat car there. After looking at my train library, found the pictorial evidence that number 9 had been loaned to the Plaster City complex to do their work while personal engines were being shopped. And I believe he's running this train on the San Diego layout down at the museum. Oops, sorry. There we go. Boy, Wayne's showing me up with his ability to present. All right, with that information, he's set to constructing a flat car. Where's it? We got people coming in while I'm trying to do this. Okay, there we go. That has track installed to hold an engine. Since they only had 2 1940s era SP standard gauge flats, they were converted for this use. There it goes. And there's another view of the train. San Diego layout, I do believe. Gene, does that look familiar?
I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think it is. Yes.
Yeah, I could be wrong. I'm just, but I think he belongs to that club and he's running trains down there today, I think. I already showed that picture. What's going on here? There we go. All righty. And it actually was the second photo in the email. And there his train at the transfer ramp. And apparently the ramp, he can drive the train up the ramp because it unexpectedly is able to conduct power. So there you go. Okay, Wayne. Teach us how to do concrete.
I had to find my unmute button.
I usually have a hard time finding it when I'm muted too.
Well, I've got 500 people on this other side of my computer over here wanting to look at things. I'm seeing,
Makes it hard to find things. Yes. I
yeah,
agree.
I got 5 different screens on this layout here. Okay, share screen. Okay, concrete for your model railroad layouts and buildings. This only takes a little bit.
You're not shared yet. I don't
No,
know if you were. You were sounding confident.
Yeah, I had to find everything. I was hitting the wrong share button. Okay, excuse me. Now you should see it. Concrete for your model railroad layouts and buildings. After deciding upon which kind of concrete pour I wanted to make, I make a form. You can make a slab, piers, walls, and footings and do it on site so it blends in with the scenery. It has glue in the cement and sticks to just about everything you touch with it. I use a plastic tub and spoon, which are disposable. I let the overage dry in the plastic bucket, which is a quart size. It will break out very easily and not damage the bucket for many uses. The product is what I have here is anchoring cement. This is one brand. There are several on brands that all be the same. I found that plastic strips work the best. If you use wood, the wood will be glued to the cement and it's hard to remove. If you want lines or designs on the concrete, reverse engineer the form to include them. Add small strips of plastic for layer effects of concrete. Either make a form and then put it in place as a whole piece, or as I have had to do on several occasions, piece it together on site, such as a side of the hill with the trestle piers in it. As long as the sides of the form are stiff, the form will not bend out of shape. But be aware they must be stiff enough as gravity will force the cement sideways. I have poured a footing around the building already glued down. It was a thin pour, but created a very convincing slab. As several methods of attaching the form to the scenery. Using a glue gun also makes the lateral movement of the form very minimal. I have found that my low temperature hot glue gun will create a seal between the form and the scenery so the cement will not run out the bottom, but will not stick enough to rip out in the scenery. I have laid down already. Minor repairs may have to be made, but minimal. Masking tape will work also as shown in the picture. I'm using both methods. Make the sides of the form higher than is needed. Do not be overly concerned with leveling the forms, because when the concrete is poured, it will seek its own level, and is perfect for slabs. Here you can see where the ground is on the closest side is lower in elevation than the back. More concrete is flowing forward, but will seek a level and stay there. Let the cement sit up for a while. Here it was about 1.5 hours. This depends on the amount of cement used, shape, humidity, and temperature. Remove the forms carefully as you can break the cement. The reason this is done, if you wait till it's dry, you cannot shape the concrete. It is dry and hard, like concrete should be. After the concrete sets up and the forms are removed, you can scrape the edges down. The cement will ride up via capillary action on the forms slightly. It is level already, but using your artistic license, make cracks, chips, and bricks. I use a soft brush to clean the concrete from the scrapings, as if you leave them on, they will dry hard and you cannot easily remove them. After it sets up more, I rub the surface with a cloth rag and remove the skim that is on the concrete. It will turn into a powder when dry. Also, I use a spray bottle to squirt a high-intensity stream of water at the exposed edge. If it hasn't dried too much yet, you'll remove small amounts of cement so the aggregate shows through. It's kind of a neat effect. And you can see that right down here. The final concrete slab under a shed. It still needs to cure for a couple of days, but it's hard enough now for use. If I have any leftover cement, I've poured in some pure forms I have made from latex molding compound. I always use these. That was it.
That was great.
Thank you, sir. That was awesome.
I hope that answered the question about concrete.
Yeah, I think so.
I think I'm going to try that, Wayne.
I think it'll work for HO also because this stuff is really, really small and minute. But you can't get too thin with it, otherwise you'll just crack all the pieces.
That could be a good effect too.
Yeah, it is. In fact, the four-stall engine house, one of the pictures you saw scribed lines in the thing, but one of them had 2 big cracks that went all the way through the form, and it looked like the slab was cracked, which actually it was. Because I screwed up and I made a mistake. I poured it onto plywood. The plywood absorbed the moisture. Then when it dried, it shrunk up or stretched, whichever, and then took the concrete cracks with it. I had to learn not to do that.
All right. Yay. Thank you, Wayne. All right. So let's move on to our clinic. James, are you ready?
I am. You just got to give me a co-host. I can't share the screen.
Oh, well, if you'd stayed in the meeting, you would have still been co-host.
My computer crashed.
That's a bummer. All right. Let's see here. Oops, I know why I can't do that. Let me go over here. See, Wayne, I'm trying to find what I need to find, and it just is eluding me because everybody's waiting. All right. There we go. All right. So James is going to give us a clinic on the next generation in model railroading. So I'm very appreciative to James. James is the one that taught me how to do this YouTube thing so we can record our meeting. So you're on.
All right. Hey, all, my name is James. I'm from Frisco, Texas. I'm here to talk to you about the next generation model railroading. This is around like 30, 40 minutes. And then I usually allow a lot of time to ask questions and stuff and discuss because everyone seems to have a lot of questions about this. But I really want to start this clinic, and I really want to talk about sort of who are we going to talk about? And we're going to talk about Gen Z, the next generation. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about people between 14 and 25. So sort of the beginning of high school, and then at 25, entering that workforce. So sort of in that student age right there. And what are we going to expect of this generation? The first thing is that this generation is not really big into model building. They're not really model builders. Currently, right now, and especially because of the pandemic, there are more rail fans that have smaller layouts. So they're more focused on rail fanning, and model railroading is now a second priority. The next thing, and one trait that really defines this generation is instant gratification. And what I mean by that is instantaneousness, right? Because this generation has technology at their fingertips, and they're used to things coming instantly, and they have a shorter attention span. And another thing of what I mean by instant gratification is this is the student age, and they have a small budget, and they have less time. So they want things more efficiently done. So those are the two things what I mean by instant gratification in this presentation. And lastly, we're going to talk just a little bit about social media today because that's really big with this generation. And another thing is that all photos are actually sent to me by model railroaders that are my age. So I didn't get these off of Facebook or anything like that. Everybody in this age range that I'm talking to has sent me photos. I'd just like to share that. So I want to talk about, and the first thing I want to talk about is model railroading. What is changing right now? And there's a couple things that this generation is changing. And the first thing is modeling preferences, right? And then with modeling preferences, layout design usually changes. And then we're also going to talk about technology, what technology we're seeing this generation use. And then lastly, a little bit about social media usage. So the first thing I want to talk about is modeling preferences. And the first trait that comes to mind with modeling preferences is what I said on a couple slides ago, that instant gratification trait, that efficiency trait of being the student age, and also that instantaneous trait because they have things at their fingertips and they're used to that. So you're going to see more pre-built kits compared to scratch building kits, right? This generation right now doesn't have a lot of time to scratch build, like a 10-day scratch build, right? So you're going to see more instantaneous things. You're going to see more unweathered things compared to kit bashing and weathered things. And another thing you're going to see is more easy track and flex track compared to hand lay track. And another thing, the last thing you're going to see is woodland scenics. We see a lot of woodland scenics right now, but my generation in particular really likes this because woodland scenics gives you that instantaneous value, right? You can shake their magic turf on your scene and spray it with your magic spray, and you have a scene within seconds. And that's something my generation values. So the first building, we all know what pre-built kits are, but I always like showing examples because I am a little bit of a visual learner. And this is what I mean by a pre-built kit, right? It's just plopped down, it's set there. It's something that's either you get it out of the box, so you don't have to assemble, or it's something that's minimum assembly, like Plasticville buildings that take like a couple of seconds or minutes to build, sort of like this one. And then here's an example. We all know what flex track is, but I just like to show it as an example. Here's the flex track right here. This is actually my layout from when I was in 6th grade. And then also you can see the woodland scenics lightly put there. So I want to talk more about modeling preferences, right? And the next thing I want to talk about modeling preferences is this generation is really focused on the actual train. They're less worried about the actual details that take a lot of time. They're more worried about the actual train because this generation is very interested in rail fanning. And they got into rail fanning is because of the pandemic, right? That's really the only social distancing thing that an 18-year-old can do, right? Or a 16-year-old who just got his license. And so this generation really likes rail fanning. And since they went rail fanning out during the pandemic, they're taking pictures of modern trains, and so they're doing what they're seeing, and so they're having modern style modeling. And another thing about modern style modeling is that they model things outside their door or model what's around you. So you're now going to see average details that you wouldn't see with older generations, right? You're going to see more sports fields and average details that you wouldn't see in Wayne's layout or in the Colorado narrow gauge. So this is an example I like to give. And if you see my red cursor right here, I'm circling right here. And this is my friend from Ohio. He doesn't have a lot of details right in this area where I'm circling. He has a little bit of woodland scenics, but if you look to the right, he's more focused on the actual train. He's more focused in collecting it. So the details are sort of the second priority, and the rail fanning in the actual train is the first priority. And you can see that here. And if we transition over to this side, he has pre-assembled buildings or pre-built kits, right? You can see this warehouse here, and you can also see this little factory here. There are things that you get outside that you can literally rip over the plastic and plop on your layout and they like this because of that efficiency trait. And you also see the flex track, which doesn't have a lot of detail around it. And you can also see in between where the tracks, where my red cursor is not a lot of woodland scenics being placed there, just very lightly. And also a lot of the engines and focusing on the engines, that modern style modeling. And then this is another example I like to give. This is my 6th grade layout when I was in Minnesota, right? I have the pre-assembled building right here, and I also have the easy track right here. And another thing I like to point out with this slide is I really like BNSF, and I used to bike a lot. I used to bike about 30 miles a day before practice in school, right? And what they do in Minnesota is there's old railroad tracks that are abandoned. They tear those up and put a bike trail there. Well, those old railroad tracks eventually go to active BNSF yard or a UP yard. And so my average route used to go by an active BNSF yard. And so I would see this engine almost every single day. So I went out and bought one when I was in 6th grade. And that's sort of what we're seeing with rail fanning, right? People going out and taking pictures and collecting the engines that they see and putting them on their layout. Or another analogy I like to give is a baseball game, right? If you go to a baseball game and you see your favorite player, you want to go collect his card. And that's what we're seeing with rail fanning in this modern style modeling what's around you, modeling those average details. And this is my friend from Milwaukee. Like Minnesota, the bike trail situation is very similar. He's actually making a bike trail right here. That's an example of an average detail we're seeing. And he also has a modern BNSF engine because he sees that a lot. And another thing I want to point out about average detail is we're going to see more average things, right? We're going to see more construction sites like porta potties, main downtowns. We're going to see, and especially we're going to see more sports fields. So for example, when I was in 6th grade, I put a soccer field on my layout because that's what I saw every day. I used to go to out of town tournaments almost every single weekend to, to Milwaukee, Rockford, Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City. And I would always go to a local train store in those cities and pick up something for my layout. My point is that trains and soccer were very hand in hand for me, right? I did both of them. And so I put a soccer field on my layout because that is what I saw every day. And that's what we're seeing with younger generations like this. A lot of people didn't really give me a lot of photos for this, but I do like to share this one. And then this is my example of a soccer field when I moved to Dallas when I was 16. And you can see the soccer field right here, the bleacher right here, and also the porta potty right here, sort of those average model details that you wouldn't see with older generations that model like Colorado narrow gauge, which I was talking about. And also this layout actually doesn't exist anymore because I went and fostered dogs over COVID, and we were fostering this big red dog, and we called him Clifford, who was about a year old. Well, Clifford escaped the downstairs, went upstairs to the train room, opened the door by himself, and just had a ball jumping on the layout and destroying it. Well, I really had a ball redoing it this December, so this actually doesn't exist anymore. But this is an example of my new layout. I'm still building it. But this is another example of modern style modeling. I live in Frisco, Texas. And if you go look on a map, that's basically the last suburb until you hit basically farm fields and ranches. And so when I drive anywhere, I see a ranch, I see Longhorn. I could drive 5 minutes and see a Longhorn. And so I incorporated this on my layout because that's what I see every single day, modeling what's around you. And then this is just another example of what I'm building. I like to show people what I'm currently building right now. And since I'm on the edge of the suburbs, right, there's all these small towns around me. And so I'm trying to incorporate that into my layout. So I'm having those old fashioned buildings, but I'm going to have those extra details in there that are sort of 2020, like trash cans and other things like that in the city streets. So we talked a little bit about modern style modeling and modeling preferences, right? We talked about the instant gratification part. We talked about modern style modeling. And we also talked about modeling outside your door, and also that they're really focused on the terrain, and they're less worried about other details. And so layout size sort of goes hand in hand with the modeling preferences, right? We're going to see small rectangular 4x8 layouts. And the reason why we're seeing smaller layouts is because there's not a lot of extra details you need to add with a 4x8 layout, right? Smaller. And also we're seeing 4x8 because 4x8 sheets come in plywood, right? You see a whole bunch of plywood that comes in 4x8 sheets. And that is very efficient, right? You don't have to cut it. You don't have to do a lot of woodworking. You can just plop it down and start your railroad. And so that's sort of what we're seeing right now. And they're continuing to do that. We're also seeing more modular, and we're going to talk about at the end. And we're also seeing that this generation really likes HO scale at the moment. Because HO scale, if you go to a train show, you see mostly HO scale. That is cheap, and there's a lot of them. Another thing is that there's other, like Hot Wheels and other, like Hasbro, have sort of toys and things like that in cars that are sort of around the HO scale. Well, when you're sort of at the beginning part of model railroading and you have that efficiency trait and you're worried about the actual train, it's fine if you have put a couple Hot Wheels on there that are sort of not HO scale. And so this is sort of what we're seeing with younger individuals. This is just an example I have for my layout when I was younger. As you can see, it's a 4x8 layout. And I also have the Flex Easy Track right here. I have the pre-assembled buildings right here. You can see my red cursor, and I have Woodland Scenics down below over here. So the next thing I want to talk about is materials. So materials are, for model railroading, the range of materials is very wide, right? We can use a lot of different materials. We see some people even using real dirt. We see people using bark for rock, right? The point is that we have a ton. The point is that there's a wide range of materials, but we have to remember that this generation has a couple of key traits. The first one is instant gratification, that instantaneous and efficiency part. And so they're looking for things that are simpler and more instantaneous. So for example, basic paint, they're using more basic paint compared to more, instead of designer paint. You're seeing less unique materials, and you're also seeing more kits out of the box. And one thing I like to talk about, more kits out of the box, and I know this is sort of subjective, but guess what? If you go to your local hobby shop, you see a lot of Woodland Scenics, you see a lot of pre-assembled buildings, because the hobby shop has to keep up. And so if you want to go check that out and see what I'm talking about, go to your local hobby shop, because they have to keep up with younger generations to stay in business. So that's something I want to point out. We're also seeing more Woodland Scenics, right? Because Woodland Scenics is very efficient. We talked about that. Another thing is that Woodland Scenics played the long game with millennials and Gen Z. So millennials is that parent age, and Gen Z is sort of getting in the workforce, right? And what they did is that they started marketing to them on social media 6-7 years back. Well, since they were the really only one who did that for that period of time for 7 years, they have a monopoly on millennials and Gen Z. And so everybody basically uses Woodland Scenics. And then another thing you're going to see is pink foam or insulation foam, right? Because guess what? Insulation foam comes in a 4x8 sheet, and I got to tell you, that's pretty easy to plop down on your 4x8 sheet of plywood. And so almost every single individual I've seen has pink foam on their layout, because it's also really easy to cut, and it's also really easy to glue together and make mountains and things like that. So that's something my generation values. Oops. All right, 1 second. There we go. So this is an example that I have of the bike trail guy in Milwaukee. His Instagram tag is right here, by the way. But you can see if you see my red cursor, I love pointing things out with my red cursor, right? He has the bike trail right here. He has the modern style engines right here. He has the flex track. And most importantly, he has the pink foam. He has installation foam. And also he has a small rectangular 4x8 layout. This is actually 4x11, but it's still very compared to what we just saw, it is very small. And so this is an example of sort of a stereotypical Gen Z layout. If we look at this, we have the flex track right here, and just another view. And like I said, this generation really likes woodland scenics. And so you can see, you're seeing more generic and less critical thinking materials. And so if you see, he has the woodland scenics risers in the back as well. And this is my example from when I was 16 and I just moved to Dallas. I have the blue installation foam and the pink installation foam. And this is just another small stereotypical Gen Z layout. So the next thing I want to talk about is past trending technology, because this is something that that a lot of people are always interested about. And this is sort of the trending technology that I saw with sort of Generation X and millennials, sort of the NMRX team's age, right? And a lot of them like 3D printing, DCC, phones for controllers, and Arduinos. I have not seen anybody in my generation use Arduinos. And so I'm not sure if that is a maturity thing or if they're just not interested in it. So I can't really comment on it, but I want to talk about these other three. And the first thing is that, oh, why does this keep pausing? And the first thing is DCC, right? Right now we see a lot of DCC, and my generation really likes this as well. Because guess what? It's basically your own personal train phone. And my generation really likes their phone. However, what I think is going to be really interesting is when these apps start coming out. We're already seeing these apps to control your train. And that's probably going to replace DCC, right? And my generation really likes this because guess what? We really like our phones. If you have a grandkid or a kid and they lose their phone, it is basically a life and death situation until they get it back. And so we're going to see phones for controllers, I think, sort of be the future and how we get younger individuals involved again. So I want to talk about 3D printing a little bit. Right now, I know a lot of people my age are incredibly interested in 3D printing, right? I even gave a presentation about 3D printing. But right now, what we're seeing with the people already in model railroading that are my age, 3D printing is not really attracted to them. What I mean is not buying parts off for mini prints. What I mean is actually designing it and having your own 3D printer. Because right now it's a lot of prep. There's a lot of many types and it's expensive. And the thing we talked about is that they like instant gratification, and they're also the student age, which they don't have a big budget and they don't have a lot of time. So 3D printing is not being really used with individuals that are my age because of those reasons. Another thing is that it was overused a lot in schools. What happened is that 3D printing went down in price and the average individual could use it. And schools used that and they took advantage of that. And what happened is some people, they made it into a chore. And so when you make something in a chore, you're less likely to have more fun of it outside of school. And that's sort of what we've seen. Now, could this change? And my generation really likes 3D printing in the future? Absolutely. But right now, from what we're seeing at this age, they're not really interested in 3D printing. And that's a question I get a lot, and I always like to explain it a little bit more. The next thing I want to move on to is trending technology. And the first thing I want to talk about is the 3D pen. The 3D pen is basically an instantaneous 3D printer. That's $40, right? And here's the thing, it checks almost all the boxes, right? It's cheap and it's instantaneous. And what it does, it's basically like a glue gun. However, instead of shooting out glue, it shoots out ABS plastic and PLA plastic. So you can make really cool standalone structures within seconds. And I always love showing examples of this. This is an example that I did. I did this for the British region at 3:30 a.m. That was kind of fun. And I also did this for YMR, Youth and Model Railroading National Meeting, about how to use a 3D pen. So if you look at this video, this is a standalone structure which you can create in minutes or seconds actually. And this is actually a width of an HO scale rail on a car. So this stuff is super small. So this is just an example I have of a building I made. I did the 3D pen stuff right here. And I also did this down here as well. I did the railings down here. And then one thing that I think everybody can relate to is when we have a railing that breaks off like this, we can redo it with the 3D pen and have a new railing within minutes. And so this is another versatile way of using this. The next thing I want to talk about is logo and sign design. So like 3D printing, the price went down for photo software editing, and the average person can now use it. And my generation has been on computers basically their entire lives, and this is something they really took advantage of. And so we're seeing more of these customized logo things compared to older generations, right? Older generations still use those, but my generation is using it a lot more. And we're seeing this. And one example is this next generation one. This is sort of my blog I made with a couple friends. And this guy made it for free. He's actually an NMRA member in Jacksonville in college. And he actually made these for free in a couple minutes. And this is another example I made. I made this actually in about 5 minutes too. It's called Skip's Western Wear. It's on a scratch building that I'm still building for my layout. And the really interesting thing is, well, the one thing I have to put a Western wear store on my layout because if you don't know me, I live in Texas and I wear cowboy boots and a belt buckle. And so this really fits with my layout and sort of my lifestyle. So the next thing I want to talk, and then this is just another example. This is sort of my Texas Railroad that I just made as a concept that I put on my layout. I helped with TTOS, Toy Train Operating Society, sort of helped them set up a new social media thing for their potential division in Texas. And so this was a concept, but I decided to use it for my railroad because it's pretty cool. So the next thing I want to talk about is scratch building, right? And I said at the beginning, my generation is really focused on the actual trade and less worried about those actual details. However, there is a minority of us who like scratch building. There's just a very, very slim margin, a very small amount of us who like scratch building. And the people who like scratch building are my age, use cardstock because cardstock is really efficient, right? It's cheap. If you mess up, you don't have to go get new basswood. And guess what? Basswood right now is like $100,000 for like just a little piece because lumber is so expensive or whatever, right? And so it's really easy to just pick up a new piece of paper and just start on it. Another thing is that you can use Google Earth, manipulate the brick on the photo editing software and put it on the scratch building so you have a modern style building. This is an example I showed you. I love showing examples. This one I made for a 3D pen presentation. All the dark brown is done by a 3D pen. So I try to challenge myself on it. So it doesn't look, this was one of my early scratch building. I just started scratch building 9 months. So this is sort of just an example I made to see if I could test myself with a 3D pen. It turned out okay, but I'm not putting in my layout. But this is a real building that actually exists in Excelsior. This was my first real building that I ever created back in August. And that was my only like 6th attempt at scratch building. But you can see here that these actual bricks right here are the actual color exact replica of the bricks of the actual building because I went and Googled it and found them off of Google Earth. And so this is actually all to scale. The next thing I want to talk about is green screen. And like photo editing software and 3D printing, green screen software has gone down in price and the average user can now use it. And so a lot of younger individuals like using green screen. For example, this is on my old layout, but this is the green screen that I have. And here's the thing, I don't like using a real green screen. I like using Party City 99-cent tablecloths that are green. The reason why is I can cut it, I can fold it, and put it in hard to reach places. Another thing is that this green is Woodland Scenics does not make. So you can use green screen on your layout if you use Party City because this is not the same green as Woodland Scenics, which I think is really interesting. This is an example I made a long time ago. And here's just another example of it. And the last piece of technology that I like to talk about is the drone. So the drone, and I actually was speaking to San Antonio LSR 6 about this, in the NMRA division down there. And one of the members actually suggested this to me, that I should put this in this presentation. I'm like, yeah, I totally forgot about it. The drone, like everything else we just talked about, is now cheap for average people. And my generation is using that to railfan as an extra tool, because you can get a different view with the drone. And another thing, this is really good for older modelers as well. If you go out and structure fan, if you fly a drone to an abandoned building, you can take a picture of it from a different view and put that on your layout, right? And so the drone can work for both generations, which I think is pretty cool. So I want to talk about rail fanning now. So at the beginning of this presentation, I said this generation, these youngsters really like rail fanning because of the pandemic. They also liked rail fanning before the pandemic, but one thing that increased was social media usage and doing things outside the house during the pandemic. And rail fanning is a very good social distancing activity when you're younger. When you're 16, you just get your license. You really can't go anywhere during the pandemic, right? And so it's really easy to just drive out to the middle of nowhere and take pictures. And so a lot of younger individuals actually did that. I was shocked by it. And also day to day, you can interact on social media day to day. So you're constantly busy. And a lot of my friends sent me photos for some reason. They sent me rail fanning photos, but they never sent me any model railroading photos. But this is just a couple examples I like to show people because they wanted to show off the rail fanning photos. And this is another example that I have. And this guy actually lives at the Texas-Oklahoma border, and that's going to be important in a minute. And this is the guy who made the next gen railroad logos or whatever. So the next thing I want to talk about is what we're seeing now with clubs and virtual groups. I have another presentation or part 2 on post-COVID clubs and stuff like that. But just for this presentation, I really like to just give a little bit of an overview because some people have questions on it. And that's a question I usually get a lot after this presentation. I'm happy to answer that. But what we're seeing now is we're seeing a lot more virtual things, especially with Facebook, and especially with social media with Facebook and Instagram because of the pandemic and because younger people like social media a lot more. We're also seeing more hybrid things, meaning virtual and in person, because hybrid clubs are a great way to transition from the virtual stage back to in person again. And so we're seeing more hybrid things outside of the model railroading community. We're also seeing more day-to-day activity compared to once a month per meetings, because now you have that Zoom meeting, now you have that social media usage, and now you can do more day-to-day things, which gives people more options and a more of incentive to join your group. We're also seeing younger individuals in my generation like permanent layout clubs compared to national organizations, because they're still in the beginning stages of model railroading and they're focused on the train. They don't have that big of a layout, but if they get a membership at a train club, they can go run it around on the track. And so we're seeing more younger people interested in permanent layout clubs instead of sort of divisions. And that sort of goes back to that baseball card analogy, which I just talked about. And we also are seeing a lot of modular clubs, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we all know what virtual groups is, but I would like to just give a couple of people, I just like to talk about this is what we're seeing with Gen Z. What are we seeing with their virtual groups? So the one thing we're seeing is rail fanning network groups, meaning, and I created one for the teens of Texas, right? I'm not in anymore because I'm not a big rail fanner, but what it is, it's 40 to 60 teenagers in Texas that are actively on a text string communicating 24/7, 365 on how to rail fan. So we have an example of that guy at the Texas and Oklahoma border. He says, hey, there's a train coming down to Dallas. Come out and take pictures. And then the Dallas guys say, hey, it's going down to Houston or San Antonio. Go out and take pictures. And when you have 40 to 60 active trains and people all over Texas, you can go and efficiently rail fan and basically you can set up a chair in 30 minutes and wait for the train instead of 6 hours. And so rail fanning is continuing to increase with younger generations because of these text strings like that. There was also Next Gen Railroaders, which is a blog I made. And we started doing a little bit of Zoom meetings for college kids. We are not doing that anymore because right now it's finals week and no one really wants to because it's finals week. But we may start that up. We don't know, but that is another example of a virtual group. And this is a big question I get a lot. what are national organizations for younger individuals out there? And one of them is YMR, Youth and Model Railroading. It is a national organization for 18 to 18-year-olds. And right now they're having national Zoom meetings. And now during COVID. And so a lot of people got to chat to each other across the nation, which is really cool. However, they have local divisions, and what they do at their local divisions is that they set up modules and go to train shows. And what they're planning to do, I talked to the president recently, he's planning to keep the national Zoom meetings and also the in-person meetings, meaning they're going to be the first national organization in model railroading that is a hybrid organization, which is pretty cool. But that's just a little bit about them. The next thing I want to talk about, and this is actually one of my last slides. Like I said, I go into social media way more in part 2 or whatever. But because of the pandemic, everybody went on social media. So we saw a ton more virtual groups, and we saw a lot more blogs and a lot more things going on there. And everybody was communicating and actively talking to each other on social media. And so the point is that there is an enormous amount of people on social media who want to join clubs. The issue is they don't know clubs exist. And this is talking about all ages, not just my generation, because there's so many new people who joined the model railroading hobby and got on social media. They want to join a club when we're going back to in-person, but they don't know you exist. So go out there and create a social media account for your division. And that's sort of my message that I have for this. The last thing I want to talk about is module clubs. I said I'll talk about this. Here's the thing. Module clubs are awesome for my generation because of the first thing we talked about is instant gratification. It's not time consuming. It's a 2x4 sheet, right? And so if you mess up, you can start over. There's not a lot of extra details you have to add in there. And so this is perfect. It's also really easy to store. I'm going to University of Texas at Dallas. I'm going to accounting next year, and it's about 20 minutes away from me, drive time. So I'll be staying in my parents' house. But if I decide to go to graduate school, or live on campus my senior year there, I will absolutely get a module and put it under my dorm bedroom to stay a part of the community. Another thing is that for younger individuals, being in a modular club is awesome because you're finally on that other side of the train show. You're on the vendor side. And that is really cool for younger individuals. And I think it's really cool too. When I was 16, I joined Trinity River Division NMRA, and I got to be on that vendor side, the recruitment, the table for Trinity River Division. And that was the coolest feeling ever. So a lot of younger individuals really like joining modular clubs for these reasons. Also, because there's mentoring. You can talk to people one-on-one and get advice. And they can show you right there how to build a module, which is really cool. But anyways, I know I talked for a little bit. But if you're going to take anything away from this clinic, it is modeling preferences, it's technology, it's social media, and also rail fanning. But that is it for my presentation. I think thanks y'all for sticking with us. I am happy to talk about anything, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, please do so.
James, I've got a question that comes through the chat. What value does your generation place on the NMRA and or becoming a member of it?
I get that question a lot. Here's the thing. What I tell people is that on a lot of these national organizations, both NMRA and TCA, have not marketed to millennials and Gen Z. So they have no idea that this style of modeling even exists. And they want to join this. However, no one really markets to them, so they don't know you exist. And that is that's my take on it. And so that's why a lot of them are continue doing modern style modeling, because they sort of don't know you exist, or they don't know the options they can do in model railroading.
Do we have other questions for James?
Just a comment. It was kind of, I started model railroading when I was a kid, started a lot in high school. And I kind of did the same thing as you're saying a lot of younger folks are doing now. It was a 4x8 sheet of plywood in the basement. And, I ran trains and didn't have a lot of buildings and stuff. So, in some ways, I think when you're starting out, it's kind of been the same for a lot of generations.
Absolutely. And
Yeah,
the interesting,
I like that insight that you had, though. Thanks.
The interesting thing is that I'm seeing a lot of them stick with that 4x8 sheet because they don't know the other options out there. And that's the interesting part.
The hope for me, James, is exactly what the last gentleman said. I started out with a 4x8 sheet, plywood railroad. I scratch built buildings out of cardstock, exactly the way you did it. But, you know, as I got older, it evolved and my skills grew and I learned more. And, you know, I don't think as I got older, I would want to stay in that 4x8 sheet of plywood with cardstock buildings. I think I would have just gotten bored of it and just gone on to something else. So I think it's almost kind of like a natural evolution of your modeling skills that they'll just get better. So that's my hope. I hope I see your generation, you know, move along and learn things from us guys and keep it going.
You know, another thing I see, except for the diehard model railroaders, that we lose them in the middle, rightly so. They get married, they have a family, they're 24/7 worrying about their jobs and working hard on that. But if they got started when they were a teenager, I think there's a lot better chance of us getting them back once those kids are in, you know, junior high or something, their kids. And maybe they'll get their kids interested in it. And at least once the kids are out of the house, then they have more time. So, but I think it really helps if they did start in their teens and got interested then, even though we lose most of them to girls and family and stuff.
James, question here. First comment, excellent presentation. I was formerly in the Northern Utah division, and as you imagine in Utah, there's lots of kids, and they are very involved in trying to get the younger generation involved, and fairly successful with it. Have you made this has this presentation been made to the NMRA leadership, to the best of your knowledge?
Some of them have seen it. I know Gordy has seen it. Some other people have seen it. I'm doing this about 12 times this month.
Okay. Chris Palermo, who is now moving to Texas and was the Pacific Ghost Division, is now one of the at-large directors for NMRA. I think he would be very, very interested in this. If there's a way we can get in contact with you, I'd love to try to hook you in with him, and also the people in Utah, because I think what you're doing, I think it's great for it. And as Trudy said, I think that one of the things that gets me also is that if they are doing these smaller layouts and something that is simpler as they go through, as you get the families and careers and everything like that, that's still something that they can keep with them, that they can still do, not taking as much time. Whereas trying to build, a full, barn-sized layout isn't going to work when you've got a family and a career.
Hey, Lou, I put my email in the chat if you want to take a look at that.
Got it. Thank you.
No problem. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Just a comment. I was going to mention that oftentimes if I go to a swap meet, I'll see a lot of the kids there who are picking up I guess they're not ready to run commercial. They're ready to run that was built by somebody, and they're just, swapping them out for other things. It's an opportunity I've seen the kids take advantage of, or teenagers take advantage of, to pick up models which aren't too expensive in those kind of situations too. It's fun to see when they do that, and they go around and kind of show off the things they've been able to pick up. It's enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. Once the train shows get back, I think a lot of younger people will be very interested in going to those, because that's something that really all ages can go to.
I had a question. In Texas, do you have a club nearby that you can visit and run your trains on? Because here in San Diego, we're very fortunate to have, for example, I noticed a lot of the kids seem to be interested in the La Mesa Club, and they, you know, I've seen kids bring, or teenagers bring, young adults bring their own equipment and run on that, and they seem to have a lot of fun doing it. Does anything like that in your area, or?
Well, I have my layout, like I said. There, I'm in the NMRA, so I'm in the NMRA. I do the social media, and so I'm really heavily involved in the NMRA. So I can go if I wanted to. I haven't. I could go and ask if I could run on train on somebody else's layout. But there are some clubs in Fort Worth, which is about 1 to 2 hours away from me, and so that does. That doesn't really work for me because that's 1 to 2 hours away, and I don't really want to drive that far.
James, most of the people in your group, are they in your area or are they scattered around the country?
Which group?
Well, not your group, but you speak of, you know, your Gen Z generation and the people that, or the people your age. I imagine that you have contact with people in the hobby your age.
Yeah, I know everybody in like almost every 50 states.
Okay, so Paul brought out a really good point about, you know, we have here on Long Island, we have a couple of clubs, one very large club called the West Island Model Railroad Club. And if that's an excellent place for, without spending a lot of time, to say go, you know, a couple of days a week or a day a week for an hour or two and see, you know, how it's done. And, you know, you can learn a lot of skills there without an investment in time or money. And I know at this club here that I was just speaking of, there are a lot of young people who are members. You know, they don't have their own layout, they don't have their own room, they don't have the money. So they join this club and they get to work side by side with seasoned modelers of all ages and of all skills. And, you know, it's a great place to learn.
I have a comment. This is John Mick. James, you said you lived in Frisco, Texas. I lived in Plano for a while, and I remember reading about some train that was being donated to a place in Frisco.
Yes, that is the American Railroad Museum. They have a thing called Traintopia, which is a display and model railroading. And they also have a big boy situated there. However, because of COVID and because they are transitioning everything up there, it has been closed for most of COVID. And also they are still building it. And so there's not a lot of things you can actually do there because they are literally still transporting the trains up from the state fair, and they do not have infrastructure there. And so when that opens, it is 5 minutes away from me. And when that opens, I will absolutely volunteer there. But it's still being built and stuff like that.
Okay.
James, are you or any of your you know, friends at your age in the hobby interested in operations?
Yes. A lot of them are. I talked to a couple in Ohio, and they frankly they knew they were the 5% or whatever, very small amount, who actually knew about the NMRA, and they're very interested in joining the NMRA because of those operation sessions. And so yes, they are very interested in that.
James, I've got an interesting question from the chat. Several large layouts are now configuring for remote operation sessions. Do Gen Z members have much interest today in remote ops?
Yes. Does anyone know Andy Ambrose and whatever club he does it? I think it's like the Coachella Model Railroad Group. He sends that out a lot. Actually into the sort of my Facebook groups for younger individuals. And a lot of them took, I think some of them have taken advantage of it. I'm not sure, but yeah, they're interested. The issue is those sort of places. The issue is those sort of groups are in the NMRA niche area. And that's a very hard community to get into when you're younger. And so they are interested, but it's very hard to make that first step, especially with COVID, because you can't be in person to talk to those individuals, but they are interested in that.
James, thank you very much. Lots of good discussion. It's good to hear people talking and sharing ideas. Very, very enjoyable. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I just had a couple of things besides thanking James and thanking Wayne for your presentations today. Very much appreciate you being here and doing that for us. Here in San Diego, we're thinking about, as you're talking about the hybrid situations in your presentation, James, we are looking at August to be our first in-person meet. And we are also thinking about having at least the program part of it, if we have a clinic or presentation of some kind, that we would make that on Zoom as well. So that would be the San Diego Division's first forte into a hybrid situation for getting together over trains. I wanted to remind people about the PSR convention in September that's being hosted by the Cajon Division. You can do a search for them online. I put in the announcements that I've been sending, there's information and links. I don't have a link at my fingertips to put in the chat at the moment, but if you haven't signed up for the convention, they're looking for people to join up so they know they have a crew for September, and it should be cool to be back together again. Everything's been recorded on YouTube. With that, I'm gonna remind myself to go ahead and stop the recording. And thank you, everybody, for being here. And that concludes our program. So if you want to talk amongst yourselves, that's cool. I'm going to go stop the recording.